All right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to add the CSS, but what I want to do is actually break my website here into kind of chunks. And if you look, you can kind of see how they would be, right? So this is kind of like my heading section, right? It's about Cone, it's got the picture, and then it's got like a caption, right, about the picture. So these all kind of go together, right? A lot of design is basically about organization and putting things that are meant to be alike next to each other and things that are not less so. So that's clearly one area. And then this would be kind of like the article, right? Like this is the general section. But then inside of that, there's basically this is a title for this, and this is a title for this, right? So these two go together, and these two go together. And if you look, there's nothing about this that's currently organizing it in that manner. So what I want to do is actually just add some divs, and I'll give those divs some classes so that I can target them specifically with the CSS and make it look the way that I want. All right. So first, I'm just going to go ahead and do this top section here. So right after body, we're just going to go ahead and do a div, and then inside the div, we're going to give it a class, and we're just going to call it our header. Okay. And then we will close that div, and it's going to give me the closing here. So I'm just going to Control X the closing of that. And then I want to take all of this, the image, the figure, and the H1. So from figure to H1, I'm just going to hit tab to tab that in. Okay. And then Control V. Okay. So now I got my opening and closing of the div, and then all of this is writing inside of it. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing for the like body of my section here. So we'll do another div. This one we're going to call content because this is like the main content of it. And once again, it gives us our closing div. I'm just going to delete that because I copied and pasted the last one. So again, I'm going to take all of these H2s and Ps, tab those guys in, just so that you can tell that they belong inside of this. And then I'm going to do Control V, Command V if you're on a Mac, obviously. Command C for copy, Command V for paste. All right, so this is all now inside of this, and you can tell because I tapped them in nicely, and those are inside of that. Now, the other thing I want to do is I want to treat these as two separate like sections, right? So I'm going to put these inside of divs as well. So underneath this one, we're going to go ahead and do another div, and we will do a class, and we'll just call it paragraph. These aren't really very great, even very semantic names. And then I'm going to take basically this P to this H2, tab that in. And then after this P, I'm going to paste that other div, right? So we got the opening and the closing of that div. And then we'll do another one underneath, div class paragraph. Once again, it gives me my closing right away. And then we'll just make sure we tab this in so it's clearly inside of this, and then paste. Okay, so basically this one's like doubly in, right? So you got the content, and then inside of the content we have paragraphs, these two of them, and then in those paragraphs we have our titles, our subheadings, and our paragraphs. Okay. See, paragraph's actually not a good name for it. Should have come with something better, but whatever, that works. All right, so now it's organized a little bit better. Now, if we were to look at this visually, like if I was going to preview this, if we refresh this, nothing changes. Okay. Just so you know, to refresh the page, if you don't want to click the little button up on the top, is Command R, Control R, or it's F5. Kind of depends on the web browser, what you're running. That can sometimes be helpful. I always like hotkeys to make things a little bit easier. All right, so now what we want to do is actually add our CSS that's going to target these, as well as just the general things here. So if you remember, that goes right inside of our head because that's kind of the stuff that doesn't show up on the page, but it affects what you see on the page. So we need to start off with style, like that, and then we put all of our CSS rules inside of here, okay? So if you remember, you had to have a target and then the properties here. So the first thing we're going to target is just going to be the body, like this, right? So we do the opening braces and the closing braces. The reason we're doing body is that body encapsulates the whole thing. So basically what we're doing with body is that it's going to set up our defaults in a way. So now inside of body, we're going to go ahead and do background color. And then I really don't care what you do for the background color. They have all these preset ones. We could also do hex code. I like RGB because it's a little bit easier. And then you do parentheses, and then you can just put some numbers in there. I'm just going to go ahead and put some numbers in there of what I want. So we'll do like 94. Actually, you could try doing this. I think this will work. 0, 0, 0, right? Okay. And then because this program's nice, if you hover over it, now I can choose a color and just do it dynamically this way. It's a little bit easier. So we'll just go with this. I don't really care what color, it's just do a background color. But that's one way of kind of making it work a little bit easier. Then we'll do color, and we're just going to do black because we just want the text color to be black. Font family. And again, this is nice because it gives us all these options, which make things a heck of a ton easier. I'm just going to do Arial just because that's super generic and easy. And then margin. I always like to set up the margin. We're going to do 0. Oops. And I like to set up padding. And then, oops, right. I don't know why it's auto. We'll also do 0. Let's just do PX just in case. I don't think you need to. I think it'll think it's PX or it's pixels by default, but eh. I always like to set those up because that way you just set up, okay, I want all the margins and paddings to be a certain size. This is important because if you don't set margin and padding just for the page in general, the Chrome might be like, okay, default margin is 10 pixels. But then Firefox might be like, oh, it's 5 pixels. And so your site will actually look different. So you want to set all of your defaults, even for things that the browser itself will impose, because that way it'll be consistent. So even if you wanted these to be 5 and 5, that's fine. You just want to make sure you put those down specifically. Otherwise, it'll vary from page to page. It's just one of those dumb things. Same thing with the font family. It'll probably be fine, but this way it's specifically saying this, and it'll be Arial for all of them. Okay. Then we're just gonna last one, and this just because we're doing a fixed width page, meaning that it's a straight, flat composition where it's not responsive. It's not going to change scale. It's not going to do like text wrapping in the traditional sense. It's going to be absolutely a certain size. And we're going to do 960. And the reason why we're doing, oops, should have been width, sorry. Width 960. And the reason why we're doing that is because that's kind of like the default. That should work on anything. It's not super big, obviously, but that should be fine for what we need to do. All right. I like to do this now, even though it's just so it takes up less space. Okay, come on. There we go. And then we'll do the next one. So next one we do is I'm just going to set up, I like to set up the generic stuff first, meaning like the body, the H1, like all of the elements here that are already there, like P's and H's and things like that. Not my stuff that I'm specifically made classes for. So for the H1, we're going to go ahead and do font size. And I'm just going to go ahead and do... Now, we're doing a fixed width, which means that we don't use responsive size. It means we use pixels because we're not worried about it scaling. Like, we know this is going to be absolutely this specific size, and it doesn't matter what device you look on, it's always going to look like this. So everything we're going to be doing is going to be pixels, okay? Now, with the margin padding, didn't matter either way because 0 is 0%, 0 pixels, 0 EMs, it's 0. It's not, there's nothing with that. So, but for the other stuff, I'm going to be using pixels, but that wouldn't always be the case. Okay, so then we're going to do is text align. So I'm looking for a very specific look. If you look at the example above or in the next slide, you'll see what I'm trying to do. But what I'm going to do is basically I want to take this about cone. Instead of having it above it, I'm going to make it go, like make it larger and have it actually going sideways. I just think that would look interesting. So that's what we're shooting for. Okay, so that's, you'll see. So anyways, text align, we're going to do right. And so, yeah, and then we're going to do position. And we're going to do absolute. Okay, and then we're going to do top. We're going to do 125 px. And then left, we're going to do 0 px. And then we're going to do transform, and we want to rotate. And we are going to do minus 90 degrees. Like that. Okay. And I thought I had a semicolon, didn't give me one. Okay. So, here's the thing. You know, if I was just doing this straight up without knowing, like, I did this a bunch, and then I came up with this. It wasn't like I was just typing it out like you're seeing now. You know, I was like, oh, I want to rotate it. So then, like, I very rarely use this. So I looked up, like, I went to W3 schools and looked up, like, how to rotate, what's the transform. And then I saw some examples, and then I just copy and pasted it. The other thing here is that you see position absolute and the top and left. So absolute, if you remember, you can have relative. What other ones are there? There's usually the two that you use are relative. Fixed is another one. Absolute is another one. But absolute is, again, that's going to work well on a fixed width, one that's static, the page that we're creating, because we're saying it's always going to be at this position. But you wouldn't normally want to use an absolute. We're going to take that out actually when we do this in the next thing. And then I just wanted to position it. So I positioned it from the top, meaning it's going to be 125 pixels from the top. And then I said 0 pixels from the left, right? That's why I put those two in there. I don't need to do right or bottom because you're basically pushing off You're basically pushing off from the top and pushing off from the left when you do it this way. But I can't use this unless you set up the position. Otherwise, it would be doing it based off of relative, and it might be a little bit weird, okay? Let's go ahead and save this and just make sure that it's working, because it might be a little bit weird. You should probably save it too. And yes, it is. See how it's right to the right? That's good. This picture is obviously a little bit off. We're going to shove that over in a second here, but you can see it definitely went vertical, and it was the right size and everything that I wanted. So that's good. So next thing to do is to fix the figure, right? And this is another reason why figure is good, as opposed to if I had just a picture and just paragraph underneath it. Because if it's a figure, this will grab both the image and the caption together. And if I wanted to have a different background color or something, it's all one unit, which works really well, as opposed to just doing one thing or the other. And what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do position relative, just because it doesn't really matter. Whatever position it's currently in. And then we're just going to say left, and we're going to do 250 px. So basically what I'm telling it to do is to, in relative to where it's starting, which you saw where it was, I could also make this absolute. It really wouldn't matter. You should generally use relative. But in order to use my left, to push off from the left 250 pixels, I have to use a position first. Otherwise, that will not work, okay? Same thing with Z index. If you remember, you can push pictures in front or behind each other. Same thing, okay? So I just want to push off 250. I'll just save this, Control S, go here, I'm gonna hit Control R, and you can see it pushed them over. So now this looks how I wanted it to, okay? Good. All right, so the next things to do are basically just to format our content here, right? So if you look right now, you can see they're just stacked up and down. I want to do two paragraphs next to each other, so almost like a column system, okay? Right now, that is not the case. It just looks very flat. So we're just going to go ahead and do that. That should be relatively easy. So let's go ahead, and we are going to first do dot content. If you remember, to target classes, it's dot, and then the class name. If it's an ID, it's the pound symbol or hashtag, as you kids say these days. You would do that. So we're going to first do background color, and then I'm going to do the same thing I did before, RGB, parentheses, and then I'm just going to use this one as starting base, and then once that's in, I'm just going to go ahead and hover over it, and we'll do a little more. Oops, come on. I would put way more thought into this if it was like an actual thing, but this is just for, what we're doing now. So normally you would want to look up colors that are harmonious and all that jazz, but I'm not too concerned about that at this very moment. Okay, so we're going to make these line up next to each other, we need to do this. We need to change the display type. Now, if you remember, there's block and there's inline. Block elements mean that it will start on a new line. Every time you have a new block, it's like hitting enter and it will start in the next line. Inline elements will be one right after the other, right? So it would be like this, and then it would be the text next to it. But in this case, these are both blocks, so this will start on the next line. What we're going to do is we're going to force our content, the content that's inside of it, and we're going to actually do inline block, which will have the the strength kind of both sides. You'll see in a second. So we're going to do inline block, and then we're going to go ahead and add a little bit of margin so there's a little bit of space between them. Otherwise, when we go to do this, the text would, see how these are like touching right now? You can't even see the eye. They're like touching the wall because there's no margin. If we were to put these in two paragraphs without margin, these will be touching. Like this text here will be right touching against this, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to put margin on this specifically, and we'll just do 10px. Yoink. And then The next thing is padding, and that's because we have a background color. Let's put a little bit of space between the background color and the other thing. So we'll do padding, and we'll just again do 10 px, and then yeah, that should be good. So oops, and so let's go ahead and save that. You should see. Let's see how this works. Refresh. Good. Okay, so you can kind of see us doing that. Actually, I don't know why I bothered putting inline block here. We actually have to. Yeah, it actually didn't need to be on the content. It's the paragraph that needs the inline block. Okay, so we'll put on both. It's not going to hurt anything. So we'll put paragraph dot paragraph. So this is going to be our paragraphs themselves. We're going to make each paragraph a width of 400. Okay, that way we'll force it to a certain width, so that way it'll fill the full. If you remember, we're 960, so if we do 400, that'll equal what do you call it? That'll equal 800. But then with the mat padding and margins and stuff on either side, it should. It's not going to be the full size, but we could do the math if we want to make it exact. But I'm not that concerned. This is the one that actually needs the display and the inline block. The other one doesn't actually matter because it's not inline blocking to anything. And then the next thing we need to do, and this is kind of important. Let me go ahead and save this so you can. Oops, I'm gonna Control S so that you can see. So now if I hit Control R. See how like, yeah, good, right? We have the padding and the margin that's separating these two. But notice that this is like down a little bit. It's kind of weird, right? It's basically starting where this line ends, the very first line, which is kind of dumb. I'm not 100% sure why that's happening. But the way to fix it is you just want to do vertical align, and just vertical align to the top. And that just means it's going to force it to, instead of aligning at the bottom of both of them. See how the bottom here and the bottom here are both aligned? That's the default way. What it's going to do is, let me see. Let me fix this. Control S. What it's going to do is Control R. It's going to align to the top of them each instead of the bottom of them each. But you can also do vertical line bottom or right, or actually it wouldn't be right, but you know what I mean. Good. Okay. So now that I think is it. So that's what it should look like. You should have something that looks like this. If you don't, then look to see what's going on. There shouldn't be too much variance. They're generally kind of the same. But once you're happy and you know it, just clap your hands and click on the slide to the next one.